when Ruan Xinglan pushed the transfer order in front of me. The conference room fell into a dead silence, save for the faint hum of the air conditioner. There was in stark black and white. I was being reassigned as general manager of the Qingling branch, tasked with reviving its failing assets. It was Launchu Technology's most remote, dilapidated branch. A 2.5-hour drive from the nearest high-speed rail station, where even the financial seal had passed through 3 different hands. I was a co-founder, and more importantly, his husband. Yet, he treated me like a mere expense report, speaking to me with cold indifference, without even bothering to look up. Shen Luobai immediately lowered his head, softly making excuses for him, claiming this was entirely for the good of the company, and not a personal attack against me. Though his lips told me not to misunderstand, a gleam of smugness flashed irrepressibly in his eyes. He was wearing a suit he had personally chosen, adorned with a silver lapel pin he once claimed was meant as a gift for an important client. His hand rested firmly on that blue folder, which contained the very proposal I had poured 7 long months of labor into creating. Only last night, I was still at home, refining the final version of the data model, exhausting every ounce of my energy. Yet by this morning, it had become the grand achievement he presented to the board, completely stealing the fruits of my hard work. Ruan Xinglan sat at the head of the table the entire time, silently condoning this absurd, blatant plunder. Finally, he raised his head, frowning as he demanded to know exactly what my expression was supposed to mean. I spoke up, questioning him directly, since when did this proposal belong to Assistant Shun? As the words left my mouth, someone in the room drew a sharp, quiet breath, and the air instantly froze. Shen Luobai turned deathly pale, putting on an act of profound grievance, as if I were the one victimizing him. He claimed he had also worked on it for 3 months, and was merely responsible for compiling and presenting the material. I couldn't help but let out a bitter laugh, asking him if merely compiling material, could they truly replace even the original architect? Ruan Xinglan snapped the folder shut with impatience, the sharp sound echoing through the room, and abruptly cut off my questioning. The look in his eyes held not just irritation, but a piercing disappointment that I knew all too well. He blamed me for forcing Shen Luobai, who was presenting for the very first time, into such an embarrassing position in front of everyone. I stared at him, asking back in utter disbelief. So I was the one making things difficult for him? Lowering his voice, he told me that, as his husband and a company veteran, I needed to learn to be magnanimous. Hearing the word magnanimous from his lips felt nothing short of absurd. 3 years ago, when the company's cash flow almost dried up, where was he? It was I who mortgaged my pre-marriage property to barely pull us through that life-or-death crisis. 2 years ago, when his father's investments failed, it was I who acted as the guarantor for the Ruan family business. That heavy deed of guarantee was signed by my own hand. Last year, when his brother crashed a client's car, it was also my money that settled the matter. Yet these detailed accounts were never once mentioned in front of him. Out in the world, he was the fierce and decisive President Ruan. But at home, he never had to worry about a single utility bill. Everyone said Ruan Xinglan married well, that he married a man willing to stand behind him and carry him all the way to the top. But as time passed, he forgot that the person carrying him was also human, not a stepping stone. With rimmed red eyes, Shen Luobai spoke up, saying he didn't want to affect our marriage because of this. He even bowed to me as he finished speaking. The expressions of the executives in the room grew subtle. Some thought he was sensible, while others thought I was being overly aggressive. Ruan Xinglan's icy gaze pierced through me, demanding to know what more I wanted. I stared at him, as the last warmth in my heart slowly sank away. So, it wasn't that he couldn't see. He simply chose to stand by his side. I picked up my badge, flipping to the very last page. I questioned them whether the Qingling branch still held its independent operating authority. They all froze in shock, likely unexpected that I didn't continue the argument. I demanded complete operational control, personnel management, financial approval rights, and the priority right for restructuring. Otherwise, I refused to go. Wan Xinglan frowned, asking if I was trying to negotiate terms with the company. I told him no. Demanding these terms was simply to avoid being the scapegoat again when the losses are cleared in the future. The meeting room fell completely silent for a moment. Shen Luobai hastily spoke up to defend Ruan Xinglan. I ignored him, keeping my eyes solely on Ruan Xinglan. His expression turned grim. In his eyes, my calmness today was far more embarrassing to him than a sudden outburst of anger. After a few seconds of silence, he signed the authorization clause. His signature was sharp and decisive. I agreed, stating that once the documents were finalized, I would handle the handover today and leave tomorrow. A flicker of astonishment crossed Ruan Xinglan's eyes, expecting me to throw a tantrum and demand answers. But I didn't. I merely stood up and pushed my chair back into place. Turning my gaze to Shen Luobai, I demanded he complete the underlying algorithm description within a week, along with the client deployment path and cost estimation model. Since the data was under his name, the responsibility fell on him as well. I turned and walked out of the meeting room. Behind me, Wan Xinglan called out my name. I paused in my tracks but didn't look back. He told me we would talk more when we got home tonight, urging me not to bring work emotions into our personal life. I let out a faint smile and replied that he had already separated work and personal life quite clearly just now. With that, I pulled open the door and walked out. Outside the glass window at the end of the corridor, the city lights shone brilliantly. This was the headquarters of Launchu Technology, located in the heart of the premium CBD. This was the very place that Ruan Xinglan and I had traded countless sleepless nights to build. Yet at this very moment, suddenly, he felt as distant as a stranger in someone else's dream. Returning to the office, I didn't pack my personal belongings first. Instead, I turned on the computer and began backing up all the original project files from the past 3 years, one by one. The approvals, meeting minutes, and email correspondences were all backed up as well. Then, I sent a message to my lawyer, Gu Wenzhou. Let's begin. He replied almost instantly. You finally made up your mind. I stared at the screen, silent for a few seconds, before replying with a simple yes. I told him that the marital assets and company authorizations must all be sorted together. After sending the message, I finally pulled open the drawer. Inside was a wedding photo of Ruan Xinglan and me. In the photograph, she wore a white veil, smiling beautifully. She had once held me, saying I was the most important person in her life. I stared at that picture for a long moment, before finally placing it face down on the desk. By 6 p.m., I completed the handover. Just as I stepped out of the elevator, I saw Shen Luobai waiting in the underground garage. He leaned against my black Maybach, dangling a set of car keys in his hand. Those were Ruan Xinglan's car keys, an anniversary gift I had bought for her. Shen Luobai smiled with feigned innocence, saying President Ruan asked him to borrow the car to drive a client. I looked at him without saying a single word. He took a step closer and lowered his voice. By President Ruan's side, there needs to be someone who can stand with her in the spotlight. He said a man like me, who only hides in the back writing code and balancing books, was simply too boring. He added that remote Qingling suited me well, and once I left, someone else would naturally take my place. I asked him if he was finished speaking. He froze for a moment. I pulled out my phone and stopped the audio recording. His smile instantly hardened on his face as I walked past him toward the car. Pressing the button on the spare key, the headlights flickered to life. I firmly told him that this car was paid for in full by me before marriage, and he had absolutely no right to use it. Shen Luobai's expression stiffened instantly, and he scrambled to claim that Mr. Ruan had authorized him to drive it. I simply told him to take it up with my lawyer. Opening the car door, I grabbed the document bag he had placed on the passenger seat and tossed it onto the ground. Looking him dead in the eye, I spoke deliberately. Don't rush. I made it clear to him that everything taken from me would be reclaimed, piece by piece. He stood there, completely frozen in place. I drove out of the underground garage, leaving him behind. Suddenly, my phone screen lit up. A message from Ruan Xinglan appeared, demanding to know why I had abandoned Luo Bai. He asked when I had become so incredibly petty. I glanced at it briefly and chose not to reply. The next second, Gu Wenzhou called, confirming that he had received the documents. He noted that the Qingling authorization signed today was absolutely critical. The board of directors had previously left a supplementary agreement for independent restructuring. As long as Qingling remained profitable for 2 consecutive years and completed its financing, I would have the right to apply for an independent listing. My hands on the steering wheel tightened slightly. That agreement, I only vaguely remembered it. Years ago, Ruan Xinglan felt Qingling was dragging down the headquarters valuation, so he carelessly bundled Qingling into a risk isolation plan. He probably never imagined that this mess he personally threw away would one day turn into a weapon aimed straight back at him, staring into the deep, heavy night ahead. I decided to make Qingling my very first battlefield. I didn't return home. Instead, I spent the night at a hotel near the office. Ruan Xinglan tried calling 3 times in a row, but I ignored them all. When the phone rang for the 4th time, I simply turned it off completely. Early the next morning, I drove to the building where Gu Wenzhou's law firm was located. Inside his office, I signed a first batch of authorization documents. Gu Wenzhou then pushed a new set of files toward me, pointing at several key items. The ownership of the premarital property is clear. The vehicle is also registered under my name. As for the joint guarantee for the Ruan family's Nanxing restaurant, there is only a year and a half remaining. Based on their unauthorized use of funds, we can apply for an early termination. As I flipped through the documents, my heart was remarkably calm. These assets had not appeared out of thin air. It was just that, in the past, I had never chosen to count them. The most terrifying thing in a marriage is not the sacrifice, but rather when the other person refuses to acknowledge it at all. It wasn't until noon that Ruan Xinglan finally sent a message, telling me to come over to his parents' house for dinner tonight. He said his parents knew I was leaving for Qingling and wanted to see me off. Don't show a sour face. He added in a follow-up message, saying that Luo Bai had been frightened by me yesterday, and that I should apologize to him in person to let the whole matter blow over. Looking at those words, I smiled. Seeing me off was a mere pretext. A judgment trial was the reality. At 7 p.m., I arrived punctually at the doorstep of the Ruan family villa. This house was purchased after our marriage, but I had advanced half of the down payment. Back then, he said the company was expanding and cash was tight. So without a second thought, I transferred $3 million over. While I walked in, the living room was already full of people. My father-in-law sat in the main seat, while my mother-in-law leaned against the sofa, wearing an expensive face mask. My brother-in-law had his legs crossed, playing video games. And right by his feet were the limited edition sneakers I had bought for him. Shen Luo Bai sat right next to Ruan Xinglan. On his wrist was a Patek Philippe watch that I recognized instantly. Last year, for his birthday, I had accompanied him to the boutique to look at it. He said the men's design was special, and he wanted to buy it for his collection. I even asked jokingly if it was a gift for me. And he laughed, saying I didn't care for such things anyway. As it turned out, it wasn't for a collection. It was a gift for someone else. Seeing me enter, my mother-in-law immediately set down her teacup, greeting me with a lukewarm, indifferent tone. Having heard that I was going to Qingling to be a manager, she remarked sarcastically about how dusty and windy that place was. He even said I should fix my temper once I get there. He mocked that the small town didn't even have a decent shopping mall, and asked if a veteran from the headquarters like me would struggle to adapt to the local environment. Shen Luo Bai quickly stepped in, telling Jinghang not to speak like that, praising my abilities and saying I would shine wherever I went. He sounded sincere, yet his voice carried a faint, mocking laughter. Ruan Xinlan glanced at me, and calmly said, "Let's eat." I pulled out a chair and sat down. The table was filled with a lavish spread of dishes, but not a single one was to my taste. I used to ignore it, content to accommodate their preferences. But now, I realized that after being neglected for so long, even my own tastes had become a trivial matter. Halfway through the meal, my mother-in-law asked if I had made things difficult for Luo Bai. My hand froze in midair as I reached for food, and I remained silent. Shin Luo Bai immediately lowered his head, taking all the blame upon himself. The young man looked at him with heartache and blamed me for being too sensible. She advised me that since I was already in my 30s, I shouldn't hold a grudge against a child. Ruan Jinghang joined in the teasing, mocking that I was only jealous because his sister treated Luo Bai so well. My father-in-law set down his chopsticks, lecturing in a stern voice that a man must possess a grander vision. He demanded that I support my wife as the CEO, rather than dragging her down. I looked over at Ruan Xinlan. She did nothing to stop any of this. Even when Shun Luo Bai cleared his throat softly, she habitually pushed a glass of warm water right in front of him. I offered a faint smile and asked if they had called me here today just to make me apologize. Ruan Xinlan knit her brows. In her eyes, this wasn't forcing me to bow my head, but simply a way to keep things from turning ugly. I smiled and said I wasn't making a scene, then quietly set down my chopsticks. Since everyone is here, there are a few things we might as well make clear right now. The atmosphere in the living room shifted slightly. The young man asked warily what I was trying to do now. I took out the first document and placed it on the table, my voice entirely calm. Ruan Jinghang, I've been the one paying the loan on that Porsche all along. Starting next month, I will stop making those payments. Any consequences for defaulting will be yours to bear. Ruan Jinghang abruptly stands up to confront me, assuming the car had been a gift from his sister. I look at him coldly, pointing out that his sister had been using my secondary credit card all along. His face flushes crimson, as he demands to know why family members are keeping score so clearly. I calmly take out the second document, announcing the termination of my guarantee for the Nanxing Tea Restaurant. Their diversion of loan funds to buy wealth management products was already a violation. When the bank holds them accountable, I will no longer bail them out. The young man's expression shifts instantly as she slams the table and roars, accusing me of trying to drive them to their deaths. I gaze at her placidly and remind her that over the past 3 years, I poured $860,000 into their pockets, without receiving a single word of thanks. Now that I stop, it is suddenly deemed driving them to their deaths. My father-in-law's face turns ashen, as he reminds me that I only have everything today because I married Xinlan. I cannot help but let out a soft laugh, completely refuting his claims. My success came from writing code, enduring the struggles of startup life, and securing funding. And certainly not from sitting at the Ruan family dinner table listening to their lectures. Ruan Xinlan suddenly looks up, her voice icy as she tells me that enough is enough. I look back at her and quietly reply that it is not yet enough. With that, I produce the third document. I declare that the Binjiang marital home is my premarital property. The locks will be changed within a week, and she may pack and remove her personal belongings. As for Shin Luo Bai, he has no right to ever step foot inside. Shin Luo Bai's face turns deathly pale, putting on an aggrieved front as he tries to defend himself. I cast my phone screen onto the television, displaying the cold, indisputable access logs. Within the past 3 months, he had entered and left the Binjiang marital home late at night a staggering 17 times. A heavy silence falls over the living room. Ruan Xinlan's expression finally changes. She lowers her voice, asking in utter disbelief if I've been spying on her. I look directly at Ruan Xinlan and calmly tell her that the house belongs to me. The access control system is bound to my owner account. I explained that this was not about spying on him, but simply protecting my own property. Liang Manchi immediately jumped in to defend him, arguing it was perfectly normal for Luo Bai to deliver documents to my home, while accusing me of being narrow-minded. I didn't argue, but merely placed the final document on the table. I informed them that these were the attorney's contact details, and that any future issues regarding the house and car guarantees should be discussed directly with the lawyer. With that, I stood up. Wan Xinglan finally panicked for a brief moment. Rising to his feet, he demanded to know if I really had to take things this far. Stopping at the doorway, I looked back at him, reminding him of what he had said in the meeting room yesterday about not bringing work into our personal lives. I paused for a moment before adding that we should indeed keep them strictly separate. At work, I will settle the accounts, and in life, I will no longer support the Ruan family. As those words hung in the air, Liang Machi's hands began to tremble. Ruan Jingxing rushed forward to stop me, but a single glance from me froze him in his tracks. Biting his lip, Shen Luobai whispered that it was all his fault, that I had fallen out with my family, and offered to leave. Ruan Xinglan instinctively looked at him, his gaze softening instantly. Watching the scene play out, I lost all remaining emotion, realizing that some answers never need to be asked a second time. When I stepped out of the villa, the night wind was bitterly cold. A text message arrived from Ruan Xinglan, demanding that I return and apologize. I didn't reply, but immediately deactivated his supplementary credit card, along with the automatic deductions for Ruan Jingxing's car loan. I then submitted the application to release my guarantee for the restaurant and booked a flight to Qingling for the following day. Before the plane took off, Shen Luobai sent over a photograph. He was draped in Ruan Xinglan's coat, sitting comfortably on his office sofa, accompanied by a single caption, "Take care." I glanced at it, then quietly saved the image. He has no idea that these little provocations will all become the very evidence that forces him to his knees in the future. Qingling was far more desolate than I had imagined. Getting off the plane and transferring to the high-speed rail, then riding in a commercial van for another 2.5 hours. The scenery outside the window shifted from towering skyscrapers to open plains, and then from plains to dusty, gray-yellow mountain ridges. Lao Du, the driver, sighed the whole way, asking why on earth I would come to a place like this. I asked him back if I wasn't welcome. Embarrassed, he explained that big shots from headquarters never stayed long. I looked out the window in silence, thinking to myself that whether I stayed or not was not for others to decide. The branch office was a 3-story old building on the edge of the development zone, its sign peeling and faded, and half the reception lights broken. As the dozen or so people in the office saw me walk in, their eyes held no anticipation, only numbness. They had likely seen too many people sent from headquarters, either to pad their resumes or to take the blame. Leaving my suitcase by the door of the meeting room, I notified everyone of a meeting in half an hour. I requested they bring project, client files, finance records, inventory, and HR data, or give a verbal report if no files were available. Upon hearing this, a few of them froze. Standing beside me, Lao Du lowered his voice to remind me that today was Friday, and everyone was looking forward to leaving early. I didn't say a word, but merely gave him a quiet, steady look. For a company that had lost money for 4 consecutive years, to still expect to leave work right on time proved that the problem didn't lie with the employees, but that management was long dead. Half an hour later, the meeting room was fully packed. A woman in the corner with short hair and a white shirt caught my attention. Her eyes were bright and sharp, and she held a thick stack of account books in her arms. As I flipped through the roster, my gaze locked on her name, Su Tingwan. She had been with the company for 2 years, drawing the lowest salary in the entire office. Yet she was the only one who had organized the past 3 years of cash flow into electronic spreadsheets. When I asked about those spreadsheets, he nodded, admitting no one had asked him to, but he felt that someone would look at them sooner or later. On the spot, I announced that starting today, he would serve as the acting secretary to the general manager, assisting me in re-auditing the accounts. Amidst a wave of quiet whispers, he stood dazed for a moment, but quickly stood up and accepted this heavy responsibility. The first meeting lasted for a full 4 hours. The actual situation was far worse than I had anticipated. Under the guise of developing logistics software, Qingling was actually treated as a financial dumping ground, cluttered with obsolete equipment discarded by the headquarters. The losses here weren't due to a lack of value, but because the headquarters had been bleeding it dry for far too long. By 10 p.m., everyone else had left. Only Su Tingwan and I remained in the meeting room. He handed me a worn-out, old file, whispering that I might want to take a look at it. The moment I opened the file and saw the words Qingling Cold Chain Storage, Intelligent Dispatch System, my fingers froze completely. This was the early framework I had built with my own hands 5 years ago during LaunchU's initial startup phase. Back then, I advocated for cold chain logistics in remote regions. But Ruan Xinglan dismissed it as too slow for attracting investors and personally shut the project down. I never expected that the original pilot program had survived here in Qingling and had been quietly utilized by local enterprises up to this day. He mentioned that although the system was old, it was cheap and reliable. If we updated the algorithm, it could help clients reduce their losses by at least 12% to 15%. Looking at him, a sudden smile crossed my face. Ruan Xinglan had forgotten that even in the deepest mud, seeds can still be buried. For the next half-month, I practically lived at the office, visiting clients by day and upgrading the system by night. Su Tingwan stayed right by my side, auditing accounts and chasing down contracts. Even at 2 o'clock in the morning, he would still be cross-checking outstanding payments over a bowl of instant noodles. Unable to help myself, I advised him that he really didn't need to push himself this hard. Without even looking up, he replied that I was the very first person to come here, without calling them worthless. He said whenever people came from headquarters before, they only blamed them for dragging everyone down, but never bothered to look at how many hidden debts they had quietly carried on behalf of the headquarters. I closed my laptop and told him with utmost seriousness that we would no longer carry their burdens. He raised his head, looking at me in absolute silence, as if trying to gauge the true weight of my words. In my heart, I made a declaration. From this day forward, Qingling will only look after its own accounts. The very first strike I dealt was a complete and total financial separation. I sent an official email to headquarters, requesting independent accounting for all Qingling branch projects, authorized under the terms of my transfer order. I explicitly informed headquarters that any allocated costs must be backed by official approval. Half an hour after the email was sent, Ruan Xinglan's call came through. This was the first time since my arrival in Qingling that he had reached out to me on his own accord. Once connected, he didn't ask if I was settling in well, nor did he inquire about the situation in Qingling. His very first words were a sharp interrogation, asking why I refused headquarters' cost allocation. I calmly told him, because it is utterly unreasonable. He emphasized that Qingling was inherently a part of the headquarters ecosystem. I countered, stating the transfer rider made it perfectly clear Qingling is to be managed independently by me, and all financial approval rights belong to me. Silence hung on the other end of the line for a few seconds before his voice grew incredibly cold, asking if I was doing this out of revenge. I simply replied that I was just doing my job. He seemed momentarily choked by my response, but quickly brought up that Luo Bai was leading the low-carbon logistics project and needed to use the algorithm modules I had previously written. Looking at the system prompt on my computer screen, my gaze turned entirely cold. I asked him exactly which module he meant. He named one. It was the core module of my personal patent, developed entirely as a premarital achievement. This particular module was only authorized for LaunchU's use in specific projects and was never an asset the company could freely deploy. I asked him bluntly, can Shen Luobai even understand it? Ruan Xinglan flared up in anger, accusing me of constantly targeting Shen Luobai. I held my ground, saying I only asked if he understood it. He took a deep breath and said Shen Luobai needed an opportunity. I smiled faintly and told him that opportunities could be given, but not at the expense of my hard work. With those final words, I hung up the phone. 5 minutes later, Shun Luobai sent a WeChat message, mockingly saying that abusing my technical authority to seek attention was utterly pathetic. I merely replied with 2 words, "Just wait," and then blocked him. That very night, I had Gu Wonjo issue the first lawyer's letter. It explicitly informed the headquarters that without proper authorization, they were strictly forbidden from using my personal patent modules, transferring them to a third party for packaging and declaration, and, above all, tampering with the original signatures. Once the letter was delivered, the technical department at headquarters erupted into absolute chaos. The next day, Wan Xinlan called again, his voice colder than the day before, demanding to know if I really had to take things to a legal level. I replied that I wasn't the one forcing this. They were simply taking things that didn't belong to them. He fell silent for a moment, then suddenly remarked that I used to be so different. Looking out the window at the bleak, gray sky, I told him that I always had my boundaries. It was just that back then I loved him, but I kept those last words to myself, for they no longer mattered. After hanging up, Su Tingwan knocked and walked in, placing a scanned document on my desk. She told me she had discovered a supplementary agreement hidden within the old contracts. I turned to the first page, which bore Wan Xinlan's signature from 3 years ago. The terms of the agreement were straightforward. As a risk-isolated entity, if the Qingling branch maintained a positive net profit for 2 consecutive years and successfully secured external capital injection, the management would hold priority rights to apply for restructuring. The agreement further stipulated, headquarters shall not revoke independent management authorization without cause. Looking at that agreement, my heart slowly went cold. Su Tingwan asked softly if this agreement was of any use. I closed the document in my hand and assured her with absolute certainty that it was. From this very moment, we were not just going to save Qingling, we were going to build it into a real company. The first order for Qingling was secured by Su Tingwan and me, working side by side. The client was the largest local Apple cold chain enterprise. The owner, Mr. Meng, was a shrewd man in his 50s. When he heard I was sent by headquarters, he wouldn't even bother to pour me a cup of tea at first. He bluntly said he had seen too many people from Lanqiu who made grand promises when they arrived, but would never answer the phone once they left. Their system had been broken for 3 months, and headquarters customer service only told him to queue for a ticket. A whole truckload of his apples rotted in the warehouse, and he demanded to know who would compensate for the loss. I offered no excuses, but silently opened my laptop. I promised him that I would get the system running tonight, and if the early warning system wasn't restored by 8 a.m. tomorrow, it would cost him absolutely nothing. Mr. Meng sneered, asking if I was a man of my word. I placed my ID card and business card on the table and told him that I was. That night, Su Tingwan and I, along with 2 engineers, stayed in the cold storage until 4 a.m. The temperature inside was bone-chilling. Even a layer of frost had formed on the laptop screen. Su Tingwan's fingers grew red and stiff from the cold, yet she kept recording the data for me throughout the night. At 5:17 a.m., the early warning system finally returned to normal. At 8 a.m., Mr. Meng stared at the back-end curve in silence for a long time. In the end, he personally poured me a cup of hot tea. He said the contract could be signed, but on one condition. In the future, the project would only be signed with Qingling and absolutely never with headquarters. I smiled because this was exactly what I wanted. On the day the first payment arrived, someone bought a cake for the office for the very first time. It wasn't to celebrate how much money we had made, but to celebrate that everyone. Finally, we no longer had to endure being called useless by headquarters. But headquarters quickly caught wind of our success. Using the name of the project department, Shen Luobai demanded that we synchronize our client data. He called it unified management to sound grand, but I refused him outright. That very night, Wan Xinlan called me personally, demanding to know what exactly I thought I was doing. He emphasized that Qingling was merely a branch of Lanshu, and not my private territory. Looking over the financial statements, I calmly replied that these client signs and services belonged to Qingling, and headquarters had no right to take them over. He angrily barked that without the platform of Lanshu, I would be absolutely nothing. I smiled and asked him in return why he hadn't said that 3 years ago when Lanshu was on the brink of bankruptcy. The other end of the line went dead silent. I could hear his breathing falter for a brief moment. But soon, he regained his high and mighty tone, saying that the company now needed to focus on the overall interest. He said Luobai was in charge of the new project and needed Qingling's clients to serve as a showcase case study. Crisp and clear, I rejected his demand completely. He raised his voice and sharply called my name, attempting to use his authority to force me into submission. I reminded him that from the very day he signed the transfer order and the independent authorization, Qingling's accounts became my final say. He asked in a cold voice if I was absolutely determined to oppose him. I stood up and walked over to the window, telling him that this wasn't about opposition, but severance. The night view in Qingling was not as bustling as headquarters. The streetlights were scattered and sparse, yet they gave me a sense of peace. Ruan Xinlan seemed to freeze in shock. It took a long time before he asked if I was still angry. Facing his probing, I did not offer any answer. On the other end of the line, his tone finally softened a bit. He urged me not to let Xin Luobai ruin our relationship as husband and wife. I couldn't help but laugh out loud, asking him in return if he was only just now remembering that we were married. Hearing the silence fall over the line once more, I hung up the phone directly. Not long after, I received a screenshot. It was a social media post from Shun Luobai. He was subtly mocking his seniors, accusing them of taking credit for the platform and treating company resources as their personal assets, while hypocritically claiming they were happy to share. The attached photo showed his back as he stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows in Ruan Xinglan's office. Many headquarters employees had liked the post, including Ruan Jinghang. Ruan Jinghang even left a mocking comment in the section, saying that certain exiled people were getting desperate. I saved a screenshot and sent it to Gu Wanzhou. He replied instantly, saying we should accumulate more evidence of defamation. He also informed me that the application to release the Ruan family's guarantee had been accepted, and the bank would reevaluate the loan. I simply replied with a brief acknowledgement, knowing exactly what would happen next. Late that same night, Liang Man called, her voice immediately sharp with interrogation. She demanded to know how I could be so heartless, claiming the bank's afternoon audit was me driving the Ruan family to ruin. I calmly told her that they were the ones who took out the loan, and they were the ones who misappropriated the funds. Furious and exasperated, she insisted that we were husband and wife, and shouldn't keep such careful score. I told her that not keeping score in the past was a favor, but doing so now was only proper. My words left Liang Man completely speechless. Then, Ruan Jinghang's voice drifted in from beside her. He told his mother to stop wasting her breath and just wait for his sister to come and teach me a lesson. Listening to them, I found it utterly laughable. They still genuinely believed that Ruan Xinglan could make me bow my head. But what they didn't understand is that once a person truly decides never to look back, no one can ever change their mind. A week later, Qingling secured its second major order. 1 month later, we obtained a joint pilot project with 3 local cold chain enterprises. 3 months later, Qingling achieved profitability in a single month for the very first time. I sent the financial report to the headquarters board of directors, purposely excluding Ruan Xinglan. Yet that night, she took the initiative to video call me. Sitting in her office, she praised me for doing a good job. It was the first time she had praised me in 3 months. I merely offered a faint, indifferent response. He looks past me, frowning as he demands to know why Su Tingwan is still here so late. I turn around to see Su Tingwan walking past, holding some files. Hearing her name, her footsteps falter for a moment. Wan Xinlan's face darkens instantly as he demands to know why Su Tingwan, a member of the finance team, is spending the night with me. I find it utterly ironic. When Shen Luobai practically lived in our marital home, he called me petty. Yet when Su Tingwan works overtime, he interrogates her. I look at him and clarify that Su Tingwan is actually my general manager's secretary. He lets out a cold laugh, asking if I'm doing this just to spite him. I reply that not everyone is like him, blurring the lines of professional relationships. Watching his face turn pale in an instant, I expose the raw truth, syllable by syllable. Su Tingwan earned her place here through sheer capability. But what exactly did Shen Luobai rely on to sit by his side? He knows the answer better than anyone. With that, I cut the video call. Su Tingwan stands at the doorway, looking slightly awkward as she asks if she should step out. I shake my head and tell her to bring over Mr. Ming's Phase 2 contract instead. She nods, her expression instantly snapping back to a professional working state. This is exactly what I admire about her. Clear-headed, professional, and never crossing boundaries. Meanwhile, Wan Xinlan still fails to understand to this very moment that I never cared about him having a male assistant. What I cared about was how he trampled on my dignity time and again, just to protect that man. After Qingling recorded its first profitable quarter, headquarters finally grew restless. When I received Wan Xinlan's invitation to the annual gala, I originally had no intention of going, but Gu Wenzhou urged me to attend because Shen Luobai was using my old project to apply for the annual Innovation Award. He reminded me that in a public setting, the more complacent the opponent becomes, the more damning the evidence they leave behind will be. And so, on the day of the annual gala, I returned to headquarters with Su Tingwan. Having been away for 3 months, the Lanshu headquarters remained as glamorous and brilliant as ever. Inside the elevator, I overhear 2 employees talking, whispering in low voices. They gossiped about me. They questioned my transfer to Qingling, whispering that its small profit was merely a favor granted by President Ruan. They also mentioned that Assistant Shun was receiving an award tonight, proving he was the favorite at President Ruan's side. Su Tingwan stood beside me, her expression remaining as calm as still water. I asked her if she was nervous, but she simply replied that she only found the headquarters heating warmer than Qingling's. Hearing this, I couldn't help but let out a soft laugh. The annual gala was held in the ballroom of a 5-star hotel. Su Tingwan and I were assigned to a far corner, positioned right next to the speakers. We couldn't even see the main screen properly, an incredibly isolated spot. Meanwhile, Shen Luobai sat right next to Wan Xinlan, his seat second only to a few board directors. Holding a wine glass, he walked over to me, hypocritically telling me not to mind the seating arrangement. His voice was neither too loud nor too soft, just enough for everyone around us to hear his false apology. I replied calmly that the seating didn't matter. What mattered was that the financial accounts were clear. Upon hearing these words, the smile on Shen Luobai's face instantly froze. The awards ceremony finally began. On the massive screen, the title of the Urban Low-Carbon Logistics Cloud Platform appeared. The recipient was Shen Luobai. Thunderous applause erupted across the hall. Wan Xinlan sat at the head table, a faint smile playing on her lips. After bowing, Shen Luobai walked up to the stage to accept the award, staring at the project's architectural diagram. Su Tingwan Vispra to confirm. If that was the original model from my old computer, I nodded in acknowledgement, noticing that in the second data chart, even my original annotations hadn't been fully wiped clean. Shen Luobai held the microphone, expressing his deep gratitude for Wan Xinlan's trust, praising how the youth should dare to dream and act. He even added hypocritically that he was grateful for the guidance given by the seniors, who once held misunderstandings against him. The camera suddenly cut to my face, projecting my calm, unbothered expression from the corner onto the big screen. A scattered chorus of whispers immediately rippled through the ballroom. It was a mocking, cryptic smile. I noticed Wan Xinlan's expression change slightly, as if he felt Shin Luobai had gone too far. Yet he did nothing to stop it. Seizing the moment, the host handed the microphone to me, asking if I had anything to say to Assistant Shun. Every eye in the room was fixed on me. Standing on the stage, Shin Luobai had a veiled provocation in his eyes. Ruan Xinglan frowned as he looked at me, silently warning me not to make a scene. I took the microphone and stood up, offering just a single word, yes. The banquet hall fell dead silent in an instant. Looking at Shun Luobai on the stage, I began my interrogation. I asked him why the core parameters of the dynamic scheduling model in the project's third phase had been changed from B stage to C29. Shun Luobai froze. I pressed further, questioning him about the loss weight calculation for the Edge warehouse nodes. I demanded to know why he used a version abandoned 2 years ago and where the actual testing data for the East China storage zone came from. The color drained from Shun Luobai's face, inch by inch. Whispers began to ripple through the audience. Ruan Xinglan stood up and reminded me that today was the annual gala. I turned to him and countered that this made it the perfect time to clarify matters. After all, I said, this is the annual Innovation Award, not the annual Acting Award. With that, I gestured to Su Tingwan, who handed a flash drive over to the staff. The giant screen flickered, displaying a side-by-side file comparison. On the left was my original proposal from 7 months ago, complete with timestamps, initial code submission logs, client emails, and local backup paths. On the right was Shun Luobai's award-winning project tonight. From the architectural diagrams to the data models, the overlap was as high as 92%. The entire room erupted into an uproar. Shin Luobai desperately tried to defend himself, claiming these materials were shared within the project team, and that he had merely integrated and optimized them. I pressed for the next slide. The screen displayed the WeChat messages he had privately sent me, mocking me for abusing technical permissions just to get attention. On the next slide was the audio recording of him taunting me in the underground garage. In the transcript of the audio, he said that once I was gone, naturally, someone at headquarters will take my place. Shin Luobai panicked completely, shouting that this was taken out of context. I looked toward the client representatives below the stage and asked Mr. Lee, who had sent the very first version of the proposal they received. Mr. Lee stood up, his expression grim, and said, "It was sent by Director Jiang." Mr. Lee added that they had come today precisely to ask why the project manager had suddenly been changed to Assistant Shun. Those words felt like a direct slap to Shun Luobai's face, and Ruan Xinglan's face turned pale as well. He stared at the screen, then looked back at me, a clear look of panic appearing in his eyes for the very first time. He called out my name, Yanxi, saying we could discuss this matter privately later. I shook my head and told him we could not. Gripping the microphone tightly, I brought up what had happened 3 months ago, right inside this company's conference room. I recounted how he, in order to protect Shun Luobai, had transferred me to Qingling, claiming the boy was young and asking me to be magnanimous. I stared at him and questioned whether stealing results and taking credit for someone else's work could also be excused by youth. The banquet hall fell into a terrifying silence. Shin Luobai's eyes grew red, as if he were on the verge of tears. He defended himself, claiming he didn't mean to, that he was just too eager to prove his worth. In the past, Ruan Xinglan would have surely softened. But today, the evidence on the screen was simply too blinding. He opened his mouth, yet no words came out. I placed the microphone back onto the table, saying I had matters to attend to in Qingling, and left first. Su Tingwan gathered the documents and followed closely behind me. Just as we reached the door, Mr. Lee suddenly spoke up, stating that if Qingling took over the East China cold chain project, negotiations could begin as early as tomorrow. I stopped in my tracks, turned around, and agreed. Ruan Xinglan's expression changed instantly. The East China cold chain was the headquarters' most important client this year, and he knew its weight all too well. I calmly told him that a client's choice is decided by the market. With that, I pushed the door open and left, as applause never did echo within the banquet hall. Silently, yet I knew that from this night onward, The headquarters could no longer pretend that I was a failure. On the way back to the hotel, Su Tingwan stared out at the neon lights outside the window and remarked that I should have been even more ruthless just now. With a smile, I asked her in return if that wasn't enough. But she replied with complete seriousness, saying that neither Shun Luobai nor President Ruan had truly felt the pain yet. This girl proved to be far sharper than I had imagined. I simply told her not to rush, for the real scores would be settled at the very end. The day after the annual meeting, Ruan Xinglan called me over a dozen times. I didn't answer a single one. At noon, he sent a lengthy message, accusing me of humiliating Shun Luobai in front of everyone, and putting the company in an awkward position. Looking at the words inappropriate handling, I smiled bitterly. Plagiarism and embezzlement were dismissed as mere inappropriate handling, in his words, while my presentation of the truth was blamed for putting the company in a passive spot. He had never changed. It was just that I was no longer willing to play along. That afternoon, I returned to our marital home by the river, solely to retrieve the original agreements and property certificates from a safe. The neighborhood security guard looked completely taken aback to see me back, admitting that Miss Ruan and that Mr. Shun frequented the place together. I didn't push for more details, but went straight to request the owner's access logs, and my gaze grew completely cold. Shin Luobai hadn't just visited. He had been coming here with astonishing frequency, including late nights and weekends. Going upstairs, I entered the password, only for it to say it was incorrect. After 2 more attempts, the door remained locked. I had bought this apartment before our marriage. He had once changed the code to his own birthday, claiming it was hard to remember, and later granted Shun Luobai temporary access. And now, he had gone as far as changing the password entirely. I had no choice but to call property management to open the door and file a report. As the door opened, the air inside was thick with a strange man's cologne, and a pair of men's shoes that weren't mine sat in the entryway. Step by step, the scent of that unfamiliar cologne drifted through the rooms. The entryway held those men's shoes that clearly weren't mine. A white men's jacket was draped over the living room sofa, and right next to a half-finished cup of coffee on the coffee table, lay Shin Luobai's fountain pen. Surprisingly, I felt no anger. I simply took out my phone and photographed everything, piece by piece, to gather evidence. Walking into the study, I found the safe still there, but its exterior bore obvious marks of being pried open. Walking into the study, I found the safe still there, but its exterior bore obvious marks of being pried open. As I knelt down to examine it, my gaze sank deeper into darkness. Just then, footsteps echoed from the doorway. As I knelt down to examine it, my gaze sank deeper into darkness. Just then, footsteps echoed from the doorway. Ruan Xinglan had returned. Seeing me standing in the living room, he froze for a moment, before frowning and demanding to know why I was back so suddenly. I countered by asking him since when did I need to request permission before coming back to my own home. With a sullen face, he snapped at me for always speaking with such an attitude. Shin Luobai followed close behind him, carrying a bag of groceries, visibly panicking for a split second upon seeing me inside. Though he quickly recovered his innocent facade, he scrambled to explain, claiming Mr. Ruan's stomach had been bothering him lately, so he had merely come over to whip up a quick meal, pleading with me not to misunderstand. I stared coldly at the bag in his hands, which was loaded with steaks, red wine, and various desserts. This didn't look like delivering documents at all, much less just cooking a simple meal. Ruan Xinglan stepped in front of him to block my view, claiming he only came here to rest because of the annual meeting's immense pressure, warning me not to make a mountain out of molehill. I couldn't help but laugh bitterly, asking them why they chose to relax inside my own premarital property. His voice caught instantly. Shin Luobai softly suggested that he should leave first, saying that I seemed to truly mind his presence. Yet as he turned to go, he intentionally bumped into the coffee table, sending a cup crashing to the floor, shattering and splashing coffee everywhere. Ruan Xinglan immediately caught him with deep concern, anxiously asking if he had been scalded. Watching his frantic display of worry, I was suddenly reminded of the time I was hospitalized with internal bleeding 3 years ago. Back then, he hadn't even stayed by my side for half an hour. He had used the excuse of a meeting to leave. And that night, I had to pull out my own 4-drip to go pay the medical fees. It turns out he wasn't incapable of caring for someone. It was just that the person was no longer me. I took out my phone and dialed the property manager, demanding an immediate lock change and the cancellation of all access privileges besides my own. Ruan Xinlan's face changed drastically as he demanded to know what exactly I meant by this. I looked at him calmly and asked him and Shen Luobai to get out of my house. In utter disbelief, he emphasized that he was my husband. In a calm, steady tone, I told him that he had 1 week to move his personal belongings, after which my lawyer would arrive to take inventory. His chest heaved violently as he asked if I was really throwing him out over such a trivial matter. I took out the access logs, the indoor photographs, and the marks on the safe, flipping through them one by one for him to see. I asked him if he truly considered this a trivial matter. Shen Luobai had entered and left 17 times in 3 months. The safe showed prime marks. The door lock password had been altered, and even the vehicle under my name had been used by him long-term. Shen Luobai hurriedly defended himself, saying he hadn't touched the safe, begging me not to wrong him. I looked at him coldly, pointing out that I hadn't even said it was him yet. His face turned deathly pale in an instant. Although Ruan Xinlan sensed something was wrong, he still instinctively shielded him, rationalizing that perhaps the housekeeping staff had accidentally bumped into it, and blaming me for pinning everything on him. I let out a soft laugh. I truly admired him for still being able to find excuses for him in the face of ironclad evidence. I didn't bother to argue any further and chose to call the police directly to file a report. Hearing that I was going to call the police, Shen Luobai panicked completely, worried that if word got out, it would badly affect the company. Ruan Xinlan suppressed his anger as well, criticizing me for being immature, insists on dragging family matters before the police. I replied indifferently that illegal entry, suspected tampering with a safe, and misappropriation of a vehicle were absolutely not family matters. The police arrived very quickly. Property management provided the surveillance footage as evidence. The video showed Shen Luobai entering the house alone on multiple occasions, including one time where he stayed in the study for 27 minutes. Shen Luobai turned deathly pale, yet he was still trying to talk his way out of it, claiming he was only picking up documents for President Ruan. But under the sharp interrogation of the police, he stammered, utterly unable to give a straight answer. Ruan Xinglan stood to the side, her lips tightly pressed together, unable, for the very first time, to brush the matter aside by telling me not to dwell on it. Once the police statements were completed, I demanded on the spot to have the locks changed, ordered to cooperate with the ongoing investigation. Shen Luobai's face looked as ghastly as a sheet of paper. Ruan Xinglan watched silently as the workers dismantled the old lock, asking me in a low, raspy voice if I really had to take it this far. I slipped the new keys into my pocket and told them that boundaries matter. With her eyes growing slightly red, she questioned why I was disregarding our years of affection. I looked at her, my heart completely untroubled by any emotion, and stated plainly that affection is not something to be trampled upon. Turning away, I walked into the study and opened the safe to retrieve the agreement. As I left, Shen Luobai was waiting by the elevator, his eyes full of resentment as he warned me not to get ahead of myself. He claimed that President Ruan would always have a place for him in her heart. Pressing the elevator button, I advised him that he had better hold on tight. The elevator doors opened, and as I stepped inside, I told him that even that place would soon be gone. Many people believe that fighting back is a sudden explosion of wrath, but in truth, it isn't. A true counterattack is reclaiming what belongs to you, piece by piece, day by day. From the annual meeting to the listing plan, a full 3 years had passed. During these 3 years, I never once returned to Ruan Xinglan's side. In the first year, Qingling turned its losses into profits by relying on a cold chain, smart dispatch system. The team expanded to 60 people and moved into a new business park. Su Tingwan was promoted to head of the general manager's office, while Old Du took charge of client relations. The engineers who had originally planned to leave stayed behind to upgrade the products. The headquarters withheld our budget 3 times, yet I never bowed my head even once. When they cut off our servers, I simply brought in local cloud computing partners. When they blocked human resource quotas, I used my independent management rights to hire a contract-based team. When they restricted brand licensing, I invoked the terms and changed the name to Qingling Cloud Chain. By the second year, Qingling Cloud Chain turned a net profit and secured its first round of external financing. During due diligence, headquarters pressured us, claiming that the financing required Ruan Xinglan's personal approval. I placed the transfer order, its addendum, and the independent restructuring agreement right before the investors. That was the very knife he had carelessly handed over back then, just to push me out of the game. Now, the hilt of that knife was firmly in my hands. In the third year, the company completed its equity restructuring and entered the pre-IPO counseling period. Ruan Xinlan began to contact me frequently. At first, he still maintained his commanding tone as CEO, demanding to know why such a major restructuring had not been reported to headquarters in advance. I replied that every procedure was executed strictly according to the agreement and had been duly filed with the board of directors. Later, his tone softened, saying that after all, we were still husband and wife, and there was no need to take things to such extremes. I told him that we had already been separated for 2 years and 7 months. He fell into a long silence. After that, he began to show concern for my daily life, asking if my stomach still hurt. Yet, the only words echoing in my ears were, "Winter is cold in Qingling. Remember to put on more clothes." He once asked me who exactly that Su Tingwan by my side was. But with each passing day, my replies grew shorter and shorter. Until the day the IPO application was finally approved, I only sent him a formal notification letter, devoid of any personal forms of address and devoid of any affection. That night, the company worked overtime until the early hours of the morning. Su Tingwan placed the final version of the roadshow presentation onto my desk, her eyes heavily bloodshot. She told me the investment banking team would arrive at 9 tomorrow morning, and that all the materials were fully prepared. I merely nodded and thanked her for her hard work. She hesitated for a moment, then mentioned that someone from headquarters had contacted her earlier today. I looked up and asked who it was. The moment I heard the name Shun Luo Bai, my gaze instantly turned ice cold. In the chat history, using an unknown number, he politely sounded out Su Tingwan regarding her loyalty and the personal benefits of staying by my side. He even hinted that if she provided crucial financial details, he could offer her the position of vice president at the headquarters. Su Tingwan didn't reply to a single message. After reading them, I handed the phone back to her and asked why she was only telling me now. She calmly replied that she wanted to see just how far he would go. With a smile, I asked what the conclusion was, and she simply said the man was foolish, but would serve perfectly well as evidence. For the first time, I felt she was very much like me. Neither of us liked to make a scene, but both of us kept a precise ledger. I forwarded the chat history to Gu Wenzhou, who replied that Shen Luo Bai was clearly growing desperate. He mentioned that growth at the headquarters had stalled, and if they couldn't seize control of Qingling, the upcoming round of financing would look incredibly bleak. Staring at those words, I felt no sense of spiteful joy, only the quiet peace of the dust finally settling. Ruan Xinlan once thought sending me to Qingling was a punishment, never realizing that, after leaving her side, I no longer had to diminish myself to accommodate anyone else's emotions. On the eve of the public listing, a torrential rain fell over Qingling. I was in the office reviewing the prospectus, while Su Tingwan sat opposite me, checking the guest list. as thunder rumbled outside the window. The front desk called, saying a Ms. Ruan was here to see me. My fingers froze. Minutes later, the office door was pushed open. Ruan Xinlan stood at the doorway in a beige trench coat, her hair damp from the rain. Having not seen her for 3 years, she looked much thinner and far more exhausted, her face lacking the exquisite makeup she used to wear. When her eyes fell upon Su Tingwan, a sharp pain visibly flickered in her gaze, and she demanded to know if she had been by my side all this time. Su Tingwan stood up and replied politely, clarifying that she was not only my secretary, but also the board secretary of Qingling Cloudlink. Ruan Xinlan's face turned even paler, because she understood all too well exactly what the position of board secretary signifies. Turning his gaze to me, he asked in a raspy voice to discuss the document, questioning whether it was a matter of business or personal life. With his eyes rimmed with red, he asked if a husband and wife really had to draw such a clear line between each other. I looked at him without answering, because 3 years ago, he was the one who taught me to draw that line. Sensing the atmosphere, Su Tingwan tactfully left the office. Once the door clicked shut, Ruan Xinglan stood there for a long time without saying a word. I didn't rush him either. He looked around the office, his eyes sweeping past the Qingling Yunlian IPO countdown clock on the wall and the thick stacks of materials piled on the desk. Finally, his gaze drifted back to me, murmuring with emotion that I had truly pulled it off. I replied indifferently that this was the achievement of the entire team. The corner of his mouth twitched into a strained, joyless smile, remarking that I had always been this way, giving credit to the team, while carrying the responsibility all by myself. I looked at him and asked if he had come today just to take a trip down memory lane. Pain flashed across his face, and he asked if I really had to address him with such formal titles. I countered, otherwise, how should I address you? Taking a step closer, he said he knew how much I had suffered all these years, admitting it was his fault for transferring me to Qingling back then. I had waited for those words during my first year. I had waited when headquarters cut our budget. I had waited when I was humiliated at the annual gala, and I had even waited when the lock on our marital home was changed. But he never came. Yet now, just as Qingling is about to go public, here he is. I asked him if he came because I had been wronged, or because Qingling is on the verge of its IPO. Ruan Xinglan's face turned white in an instant. He demanded to know if, in my eyes, he was truly such a superficial and pragmatic person. I said nothing, because silence itself was the answer. His eyes grew even redder as he confessed that he had trusted Shen Luobai too blindly in the past and neglected me, but insisted that nothing happened between them. I offered a faint smile and told him that none of it matters to me anymore, whether they had actually crossed that line or not. As he stood there dazed, I spoke with absolute composure, telling him that the most terrifying part of marriage isn't physical betrayal, but every single choice along the way. When Shen Luobai stole my framework, he chose him. When he moved into my house, he chose him. When he embezzled resources, he still chose him. He had chosen him so many times over. Yet now he came back to ask if we could return to how things were. Didn't he think it was far too late? Ruan Xinglan's tears finally began to fall. This was the very first time I had ever seen him cry so wretchedly in front of me. He had wept in the past, but those tears were always over company financing, board pressures, or his father's debts. Back then, my heart would soften, and I would hold him while figuring out a solution. This time, I merely pulled out a tissue and placed it on the edge of the table, refusing to hand it to him directly. He picked up the tissue himself, his fingers trembling slightly, as he reminded me that we were still not divorced. I replied that this was precisely why I had come prepared, as I drew the divorce agreement from the drawer and pushed it right in front of him. Ruan Xinglan stared intently at the document, flinching back half a step as if he had been burned. He asked if I had planned this long ago. I told him I had been preparing for this for 3 years, starting from the very day of my reassignment order. He looked at me in utter disbelief, his lips pale as he questioned if all of this was truly just because of a single reassignment order. Looking back at him, I suddenly realized that he still didn't understand. It was never about the reassignment itself. It was because in the meeting room that day, he watched Shinlu Obai take credit for my hard work, yet demanded that I show generosity. It was because when they humiliated me at the Ruan family dinner table, he expected me to apologize. It was because the password to my marital home was changed, and my car was driven by someone else. Yet he claimed I was making a mountain out of a molehill. The reassignment order was merely the final thread, and once that thread snapped, the kite could never fly back. I watched as his shoulders slumped down bit by bit. After a long silence, he asked in a fragile whisper, "What if he made Lu Obai leave the company right this instant?" I smiled and told him that those were his corporate management issues, not problems within our marriage. Panicking, he argued that he could publicly admit his past mistakes, return the headquarters shares to me, and even let me return a Lanshu as co-president. But I didn't need any of it. He was utterly stunned. I told him that Qingling was doing just fine. He looked at me, and a look of pure panic finally crept into his eyes. He asked if I was truly abandoning him. I didn't answer right away. The rain outside was deafening, just like the night I left headquarters 3 years ago. Back then, I had also asked myself if I was truly letting go. Later, I endured freezing warehouses until dawn, ate instant noodles with employees in a dilapidated office, visited clients one by one when headquarters cut our budget, and suffered through stomach aches alone on countless exhausted nights. The answer had already grown clear, piece by piece. I looked at him and said, "Yes." Wan Xinglan closed his eyes as his tears began to stream down even faster. Right at that moment, his phone began to ring. He glanced at the incoming call, and his face changed color instantly. I caught a glimpse of the name on the screen, Shinlu Obai. He picked up, and after listening to just a few words, his entire body froze completely. He demanded to know what the other person meant. Whatever was said on the other end made his hand start to shake violently. He asked why the audit team was suddenly investigating him. I simply leaned back against my chair, remaining completely silent. Slowly, he raised his head to look at me, his eyes wide with utter shock. I told him calmly that his pre-listing gift should have already arrived at headquarters. His voice trembled as he asked if it was my doing. I corrected him, stating it was the evidence, not me. The weather was beautiful on the day Qingling Yunlian went public. Almost every employee from Qingling came out to celebrate. Old Du wore an ill-fitting suit, nervously wiping away his sweat the entire time, while a few young engineers gathered around the big screen to take photos. Her eyes grew slightly red. Su Tingwan stood by my side, holding the itinerary in her hand, looking sharp and immaculate. She whispered to remind me that we would ring the bell in 10 minutes. I nodded in response. The hall was filled with numerous media outlets and investors. No one could have predicted that a subsidiary abandoned 3 years ago would become the most anticipated newly listed company today. And even fewer expected that Wan Xinglan would show up as well, dressed in a black tailored suit. Her strong aura was still there, though her complexion looked terribly pale. Accompanied by several directors from headquarters, she attempted to enter the core VIP section in her capacity as the president of Lanshu. The staff stopped her politely, saying, "Apologies, President Ruan, your designated seat is in the third row of the guest section." Wan Xinglan's expression stiffened slightly. In the past, she had always held the center stage at any event. But today, she was merely a guest. She looked over at me. I did not avoid her gaze, but I did not walk over to her either. Shinlu Obai was nowhere to be seen by her side, because 3 days ago, an audit team had officially moved into headquarters, suspected of inflating project costs, pocketing client kickbacks, and forging approval documents. Shinlu Obai had already been suspended pending investigation. Before the bell-ringing ceremony commenced, the media session opened. A reporter stood up and asked if this listing meant that both husband and wife had jointly completed their strategic capital layout. The entire hall fell dead silent in an instant. Every single camera lens was trained on Ruan Xinglan and me. At that exact moment, I noticed a sudden flash of hope ignite in Ruan Xinglan's eyes. She likely assumed that I would at least spare her some dignity in public. Raising the microphone, I calmly corrected two facts. First, the listing of Qingling Cold Chain is entirely the result of the team's 3 years of hard work, and is by no means a joint marital venture. Second, Ms. Ruan Xinglan and I are currently undergoing a long-term separation and divorce liquidation phase. Please do not bring personal relationships. Had misread it as a corporate control relationship. The entire venue instantly erupted into an uproar. Every bit of color drained from Ruan Xinglan's face. A reporter immediately pressed for answers, asking if Lanshu headquarters had been involved in the management. I looked toward the big screen, and Su Tingwan nodded, switching the display to show 3 crucial documents. They were my transfer order from 3 years ago, the independent management authorization, and the restructuring agreement. I explained that I was granted full management rights 3 years ago, and all subsequent processes were entirely compliant with the law. Whispers of astonishment rippled through the audience below. Ruan Xinglan sat in the 3rd row, clutching his bag tightly. Suddenly, a commotion broke out at the entrance of the hall, and a disheveled Shen Luobai burst inside. Forcing a bold front, he pointed at me and accused, "Don't act like your hands are so clean." The security guards moved to stop him, but I raised my hand to signal them to stand down. He rushed into the media section, claiming that I climbed to the top by relying on President Ruan only to siphon off company interests. Every camera lens in the room swung toward him. With an incredibly dark expression, Ruan Xinglan told him to get out, but like a drowning man clutching at a straw. Shen Luobai cried out with bloodshot eyes, accusing me of ruining him. He claimed that by handing the evidence over to the audit team, my true intention was to seize Lanshu for myself. I looked at him, thinking how someone who climbed up through theft, when it finally fall, can only blame the lights for being too bright. Turning to Su Tingwan, I said, "Play it." The big screen immediately switched to the complete audit summary. The summary revealed that among the projects he handled, 7 abnormal consulting fees had flowed into associated accounts, along with 3 forged supplementary agreements, and 2 instances of unauthorized transfer of client data. On the very next page were the chat logs of his attempts to illicitly obtain listing materials. Bit by bit, Shen Luobai's face turned completely ashen. I picked up the microphone, and with a voice that was quiet yet perfectly clear, I questioned him point by point. "These accounts were opened by you. The money was received by you. The materials were forged by you. And even these provocative words were spoken by your own mouth." Turning my gaze back to the media section, I declared that exposing all of this was solely to ensure Qingling wouldn't take the blame, to suffer any of their tarnishing lies. The police and investigators quickly arrived at the scene. As Shen Luobai was being escorted away, panic finally set in. He desperately cried out to Ruan Xinglan for help, shouting that he knew everything about what happened back then. His words sent another shockwave through the entire room. Ruan Xinglan's body swayed violently as he finally realized that the man he had protected for 3 years would, at the moment of gravest danger, drag him down with him without a shred of hesitation. I did not look his way. The time to ring the opening bell had arrived. I stepped onto the stage, with the Qingling team behind me as the countdown began. 3, 2, 1. The moment the bell chimed, Qingling Cloud Chain's stock ticker lit up across the giant screen. Thunderous applause swept through the room like a tidal wave. Old Dude broke into tears, and several engineers threw their arms around one another. Su Tingwan stood right beside me, her eyes rimmed with red, yet she still tried her best to maintain her composure. I looked down at the audience where Ruan Xinglan sat among the crowd, his face deathly pale as silent tears streamed down his face. 3 years ago, he pushed me into exile, intending to make me disappear. 3 years later, I stand here to prove to everyone that I am no discarded piece. I'm a master of my own fate, who carved out his own path. 3 days after going public, I asked Wan Xinlan to meet me at the Civil Affairs Bureau. He did not refuse. But when I arrived, a large crowd was already gathered outside the entrance. Liang Mun, Huan Chengcang, Ruan Jinghang, and several relatives had all shown up. Clearly, they had come prepared. The moment Liang Man saw me, she rushed forward, weeping and wailing, cursing me as a heartless wretch. She screamed that now that I had struck it rich, I was abandoning the devoted spouse who had shared my hardships. With people constantly passing through the bureau entrance, a crowd quickly gathered to watch the drama unfold. Ruan Jinghang held up his phone, broadcasting live, shouting loudly that I was an ungrateful wolf who built my fortune on his sister's back. The live chat messages flashed across his screen at lightning speed. Wan Xinlan stood to the side with a deeply troubled expression, yet he did nothing to stop them. I cast a cold glance toward him. He avoided my gaze. And in that moment, I understood they were still clinging to the last of their illusions, hoping to use public opinion to force me to back down. Unfortunately, they forgot that the one thing I no longer feared was public exposure. I nodded slightly to Gu Wenzhou, and he pulled out a tablet, connecting it to the car's display screen. The first document shown was the prenuptial property notarization, proving the Binjiang wedding home belonged solely to me. The second covered the early days of the business, records of my capital contributions, and proof of technology equity. The third was an itemized list of payments I had made on behalf of the Ruans. Every single item explicitly detailed. 860,000 to cover the losses of the Ruan family tea restaurant. 420,000 paid toward Ruan Jinghang's car loan. 1,370,000 for Liang Man's medical tourism. And 2,100,000 advanced to settle Ruan Qingzhang's debts. The expressions of the onlookers and the live stream audience instantly shifted, everyone exclaiming that the husband was the true ATM here. Her face paling dramatically, Liang Man lunged forward to grab the tablet. But Gu Wenzhou simply stepped aside to avoid her. I looked at her and said calmly, "Don't be in such a hurry. There is more to come." The next page was a bank investigation letter regarding the Ruan family tea restaurants, illegal misappropriation of loans. And the page after that showed chat logs of Ruan Jinghang using my supplementary card, while simultaneously mocking me in a group chat. The hand Ruan Jinghang used to hold the live stream began to tremble. I looked coldly into his phone's camera lens and directly questioned Ruan Jinghang about who exactly had paid for the cars he drove, the shoes he wore, and the cards he swiped over the past 3 years. Someone in the surrounding crowd let out a loud laugh. Ruan Jinghang's face flushed to a dark purplish red, and he hurriedly shut down the live stream. The young man still wanted to throw a crying fit, but she was firmly held back by Ruan Qingzhang. His face had turned incredibly grim. He knew that if they kept making a scene, the only ones humiliated would be the Ruan family. In a raspy voice, Ruan Xinlan finally spoke up, saying it was enough. Desperate, the young man urged her to speak, asking if she was just going to watch them get bullied like this. Closing her eyes tightly, Ruan Xinlan told her mother to stop talking. The look she cast toward me was filled with profound shame and exhaustion. A gaze that held a long overdue moment of clarity. She whispered to me, "Let's go inside." And, as we went through the paperwork, her hands never stopped shaking. The clerk went through the routine process, asking if the divorce was completely voluntary. Ruan Xinlan looked at me with red-rimmed eyes, his voice dropping to a barely audible whisper as he asked if there was truly no turning back. I looked down at the agreements on the desk, fully detailed, with asset divisions and liability assignments. This was the ending I had prepared for 3 years ago. I told him that it was too late to go back. Tears rolled down his face. In silence, the clerk handed over the signing pen. Ruan Xinlan gripped it tightly for a long time, before finally signing his name. Those 3 characters were as elegant as ever, but they would no longer belong in my life. Once we received our divorce certificates, He stood at the entrance of the Civil Affairs Bureau, looking entirely lost. He was completely oblivious to his family's weeping and cursing, only staring at me as he muttered to himself, "If only I hadn't sent you to Qingling back then." I cut him off, saying there are no ifs. He never offered me any alternatives when he made his choice back then. So I told him he shouldn't demand an alternative from me now that the consequences are here. Having said that, I turned around and got into the car. Before the car door closed, I heard him call out my name in utter despair, but I didn't look back. As the car pulled away, the rearview mirror showed him standing all alone in the middle of the crowd. I felt no petty satisfaction of revenge in my heart. I only felt that a very long journey had finally come to an end, and divorce was merely the first step. The true day of reckoning began a month later. The investigation into Shen Luobai's issues dug deeper and deeper. Following the trail of accounts, the audit team discovered he had embezzled project funds through shell companies, totaling over 7 million yuan. What proved even more fatal was that he had also forged Ruan Xinglan's electronic approvals, leaving Ruan Xinglan to face accountability from the board of directors. Lanshu headquarters saw its stock price plunge, while clients began to jump ship. The very Shen Luobai whom he had once held in the palm of his hand had become the blade that stabbed him the deepest. On the day of the trial, Ruan Xinglan attended wearing a gray suit and no makeup, looking terribly exhausted and drawn. Shen Luobai was also brought into the courtroom. In just a single month, he seemed like an entirely different person. His former clean and gentle appearance completely gone, leaving nothing but panic and bitter jealousy in his eyes. The moment he caught sight of Ruan Xinglan, he instantly grew frantic. Shen Luobai offered a hysterical defense in the courtroom, claiming that I was the one who made him do the project, and that he was merely following orders. I watched as Ruan Xinglan's face turned deathly pale in an instant. He stared at Shen Luobai with a gaze so distant it was as if he were seeing him for the first time. He fired back with a trembling voice, stating that he had never told him to steal results, take kickbacks, or forge approvals. But Shen Luobai merely sneered in response, asking him who it was in the first place. That told him not to fear Jiang Yanqi's jealousy. Those words plunged like a knife into Ruan Xinglan's heart, causing his entire body to sway violently. Because those words were the truth. They cut far deeper than any fabricated slander. Sitting at the plaintiff's bench, I watched this entire farce with an unbothered expression. Gu Wenzhou submitted the first batch of evidence, original documents and code logs that served as irrefutable proof. The second batch, containing bank statements and linked accounts, completely solidified his charge of occupational embezzlement. The third batch of chat histories and recordings exposed the truth behind his malicious provocations and how he intentionally misled Ruan Xinglan to suppress me. The fourth batch, the Qingling Independent Operation Agreement, proved the legality and compliance of my subsequent restructuring and listing. With each piece of evidence laid bare, the color drained further from Shen Luobai's face. Midway through the trial, he finally crumbled completely. Pointing a finger at me, he screamed that I did all this out of pure envy because President Ruan treated him well. I raised my eyes and asked him in a freezing tone if he truly still believed, even now, that this was about vying for affection. He froze instantly, seemingly blindsided by such a cold response. Word by word, I made it clear to him that the law would not reclassify his crimes as a romantic dispute, just because he knew how to play the victim. The courtroom fell into a dead, suffocating silence. Shen Luobai's lips quivered, utterly unable to utter another syllable. Meanwhile, Ruan Xinglan sat in the gallery. Tears began to fall, drop by drop, as he finally saw the truth for what it was. Back then, he genuinely believed he was protecting a young talent who was being suppressed by me, when in reality, it was just a greedy, hypocritical ingrate. But this moment of clarity had simply come too late. Once the court session came to an end, Shen Luobai was taken back into custody for further investigation. Ruan Xinglan chased me to the court entrance and called out to me. I stopped in my tracks. looking down at him, standing below the steps, his hair disheveled by the wind. Weeping, he said, he only just realized today how many things have been done behind his back. I looked at him calmly and told him that I had laid all the evidence right before him 3 years ago, but he chose to look away. Tears welled up in his eyes as he finally offered me that long-overdue apology. I simply nodded to acknowledge it, but acknowledgement did not mean forgiveness, and it certainly did not mean I would ever look back. The spark that had just ignited in his eyes died out instantly, as he whimpered that he had already lost so much. In a flat tone, I reminded him that it was entirely his own choice. I, too, had once lost everything, yet I never demanded that he bear the consequences. He covered his mouth, weeping so hard he couldn't speak another word. Gu Wenzhou opportunely reminded me that our car had arrived. As I turned to walk away, he cried out from behind, asking if he sold the company and left this place, whether I would give him just one more chance. I paused for a brief second, but did not turn around, leaving him with my final definitive answer: no. This time, he did not give chase. Shen Luobai was ultimately sentenced to prison, with multiple charges, including occupational embezzlement and falsifying approvals, stacked against him, ensuring he would pay a heavy price for his greed. Ruan Xinglan resigned from his position as president, prompting a restructuring of the board of directors, while several longtime clients gradually transferred their business to Qingling Yunlian. Due to loan complications, the Ruan family's tea restaurant was repossessed by the bank, and Ruan Jinghang's car was towed away as well. Liang Man could no longer boast to her relatives about having a president for a daughter. By the time these pieces of news finally reached my ears, I was already at Qingling's new headquarters, leading our annual strategic meeting. Su Tingwan placed the documents neatly in front of me, mentioning it with casual indifference. They noted that Ms. Ruan had already stepped down from management. I merely offered a brief hum of acknowledgement, opening my files to show I had no further questions. As the meeting concluded, Qingling saw its very first snowfall of the year. I watched the employees building a snowman downstairs, remembering how, when I first arrived 3 years ago, the city felt so gray and dreary. The branch office back then seemed like a forgotten corner. Now, the building below was ablaze with lights. Listing photos proudly adorned the walls, and everyone smiled as though they had won a long, hard-fought war. When my phone finally rang, an unfamiliar number flashed across the screen. Upon answering, there was only silence on the other end, until a few seconds later, when a voice drifted through, Ruan Xinglan's voice, both so familiar and yet so strange. I remained silent. He asked softly if we could meet. My initial instinct was to refuse, but looking through the French windows, I noticed someone standing out in the snow downstairs, without an umbrella. Ultimately, I made my way downstairs, not out of a softened heart, but because certain things needed to be said once and for all. In the lobby, Ruan Xinglan's eyes welled with tears the moment he saw me. He looked even thinner than before, like a flickering lamp on the verge of burning out. Forcing a smile, he congratulated me on doubling Qingling's profits. I offered only a cold, detached reply. Thank you. Those two short words caused the light in his eyes to fade. He pulled out a box containing a wedding ring. Explaining he had found it while sorting through his things, he remarked that he finally understood how some things are easy to take off, but so incredibly difficult to put back on. I stared at the ring without reaching for it. His tears finally spilled over, weeping with deep regret. He confessed that for the past 3 years, he had wondered every single day, what would have happened if he had just trusted me a little more, or if he hadn't wronged me just to protect Shen Luobai. I cut him off, addressing him by his full name, and told him that his regret wasn't necessarily over losing me. I told him that what he truly regretted was likely losing the one person who would always clean up his messes. He shook his head frantically in denial, saying that he was genuinely filled with regret. But I simply told him, whether it was real or fake, it no longer mattered. In a very soft, quiet voice, I told him I no longer needed to judge his sincerity. Watching his entire body freeze, my heart felt an unprecedented sense of peace. There was a time when I desperately craved his explanations and apologies, longing for him to firmly choose me, just once. But the moment a person achieves true clarity is when they realize they no longer need those words anymore. Wan Xinglan wept, asking us if this was truly the only way things could end. I merely gave a calm nod of confirmation. This was the only way. Her fingertips turning white as she clutched the ring box tightly. She asked if things would have been different had Shen Luobai never existed. Shaking my head, I told her, even without Shen Luobai, there would have been someone else. The problem was never just about him. It was that she always believed my dignity was something that could be compromised, that her family could trample on my hard work, and that my boundaries could be pushed back time and time again. Shen Luobai merely amplified those existing problems. What truly made me walk away was how, after making his choices time and again, he still expected me to be magnanimous. The snow began to fall heavier and heavier. Ruan Xinglan stood in the snow, weeping so hard she couldn't speak. I placed an umbrella into her hand. She looked up and called my name, as if grasping at the final shred of hope. Stepping back, I told her not to misunderstand. The umbrella was only because the snow was heavy. The light in her eyes shattered completely. Turning around, I walked back toward the main lobby. Behind me, she choked out through her sobs that she had loved me. I paused for a moment, but did not look back. I said, I know, and I loved you too. With that, I continued walking forward. The automatic doors slid open, and a warm light fell over me. Su Tingwan handed me the materials for the next meeting. She didn't ask what had happened downstairs, but simply informed me that the investors had arrived. Taking the documents from her, I said, let's go. Before the elevator doors closed, I took one final look outside. Ruan Xinlan stood in the falling snow, holding an umbrella, finally realizing that some people, once they walk away, will never look back. I withdrew my gaze and looked into the elevator mirror and my own face, which showed not a single ripple of emotion. There was no anger, no regret, and no wild joy, only an absolute, profound peace. 3 years ago, when I was exiled to Qingling, everyone thought I was a loser. 3 years later, I have built a towering skyscraper from those very ruins with my own hands, turning past humiliation into my ultimate leverage. That decayed marriage of mine has now been buried completely behind me. Ruan Xinlan once rushed over through the night, begging me to come home, but she didn't know that I had long since lost my home. My home is something I have rebuilt all by myself, and those who arrive late are destined to stand outside the door forever.